It is time to build an upper bunk for the boys in our 1978 Dodge Sportsman high-top camper van. Welcome to the Hippie Geeks. Let's dig into this project. When we bought our van, the previous owner had built a storage platform over the back of the van that just happened to be big enough for Noah to sleep in. However, we want to be able to have both of the boys sleep up there together, so we need to build something new. When I was doodling up my ideas for this, the most important thing is that it is able to collapse back to the size of the previous platform. Well, actually the most important thing is that it doesn't collapse and crush Lindsay and I sleeping below it, but after that the most important thing is having it collapse. With that in mind, I made a couple of measurements and I figured out a way to make it work. The first thing to do was get the pieces of plywood cut to size. My plan was to have them cut down in the store, but it was not available. The problem was, I had brought our 1977 Jeep CJ5 to the store. I thought about it for a minute, and this was the solution I came up with. It worked out surprisingly well. I just strapped them to the top with a couple of ratchet straps. With the transportation part figured out, now I needed to get them cut. I stacked them up on top of our picnic table in the front yard, and after lining the edges up, I clamped them together so they wouldn't move, and I could cut them at the same time. I had figured out earlier that I needed 3 pieces, each measuring 4 foot 8 inches by 2 foot 0 inches. First, I cut them to length with the 4 foot 8 inch measurement using our circular saw. I accidentally messed up my cutting line, but was able to go back and mostly correct it. Once that was done, I rotated the pieces and cut them in half. I tried to be super careful with this cut, as these were the edges that would be butting up against each other. Once I had them all cut to size, I set them aside and grabbed the 2x4 supports. I needed to cut the 6 supports that will carry the weight of the bed to the same 4 foot 8 inch measurement. I measured each one and cut it off with a chop saw. Once I had them cut to length, I needed to cut each end at a 30-degree angle. The top slopes in pretty drastically, and if I wanted these pieces to fit, they needed to have the same angle. Once everything was cut, it was time to sand. So much sanding. I had to sand all of the supports smooth and to make sure that I removed all of the markings that the lumber comes with. Once all of the supports were sanded, I moved on to the plywood. I am not going to make you watch all of that, as if you have seen me sand one thing, you can imagine what sanding anything else looks like. It did take a couple of full sheets of sandpaper though, as splinters on the edges of the lumber loves to rip the paper. Now that all of the boring parts are done, we can get back to the fun part, assembling everything. There is no way to build this first and then get it in there, as the supports are as wide as possible to get as much support from the edges of the van as possible. That means that we would need to build it in place. I slid in the first 2 supports and spaced them the 24 inches apart that I would need for the rear platform. Once those were in, I grabbed the first piece of plywood. I initially tried to put it in with the pretty side up, but then I remembered that I wanted the pretty side down, as that is what we would be looking at, so I flipped it over and then got it into place. Now that the pieces were in, I used a speed square to make sure the edge of the plywood was flush with the face of the support, and then clamped it into place so that it wouldn't move. I measured in from the edge 3/4 of an inch so that the screws would hit in the middle of the supports, and then put a screw in every 6 inches from each side, which was 8 screws. Once I finished on the front side, I did the exact same thing on the back side of that platform. With all of that done, the first platform is complete and it is time to slide it back into place. Now, I didn't round the edges back there, and that was on purpose. I was able to push the platform back until it was about 3 inches from the back, leaving a gap. I wanted to leave the possibility for airflow from back there, plus it gives the boys a little extra legroom. With that in place, it is time to get the next section built. First, I needed to get the next support in place. This one will stay connected to the last platform, so I attached them together with 3 screws just to hold them in place. The sliding edge of the plywood from the next section will rest here, so it just needs to be kept in place. Once those 3 screws were in, I put in the next support and measured 24 inches away from the last one just to get it mostly in place. I actually remembered to put it the right way down this time, and once I had it slid up there, I attached them together the same way. I used the speed square to make sure they were flush, then put in screws every 6 inches to get them connected. This only happens on the front support this time, as the intention is to let this section be able to slide up on top of the first one. It was time to see if my idea was going to work, and I was thrilled to see that it worked out amazingly well, at least for this first section. The tough part was going to be on the next section, as it had to stack on top of the first two. The first thing to do is the same as last time, and I needed to attach another support to the previous one so that the last section of plywood would have somewhere to rest. 3 screws later, and it was time to get the last support put in. Once it was in place, I ran into an issue with being able to record what I was doing, as there was nowhere to put the camera where I would actually be able to show what I was doing. Luckily, it is the same thing we did to the last section, and I lined up the faces of the plywood and support and screwed them together. Moment of truth, is it actually going to work with all 3 sections? Looking up from below, and it worked! You can see it all collapse into one section, and then I can pull it all back out again. Taking a look up close, and you can see what the platform looks like collapsed into a storage shelf. I am really happy with how it all turned out. Let's change it back into a bed platform now. So you can't really tell from this, but that top section is friction fit in there very securely. It takes a good bit of force to get it to move, so it should stay in place even in the event of a head-on collision. If it ever starts to loosen up, however, I will just drill a hole through all 3 sections and drop a pin into them, which will keep them from moving completely. If you have any questions about its strength, this is all 250 pounds of me climbing up there and moving around. It is tight, but even I can fit up there if I need to. The thing I love most about this is that the end of the platform ends up being right next to the operable part of the windows in the topper, so the boys will have nice, fresh air up there in the summer. This platform ended up being exactly what I wanted, and it works exactly like I wanted it to. It feels really good to have a project work out like this one did. If this is your first time here on the Hippie Geeks, it would be wonderful to have you subscribe. Hopefully, digging into this project with us will help you digging into your projects. If you enjoyed this video, give it a like and check out our Patreon page or merch store to support the channel directly. Thanks again, and we will see you on the next one.